Yes, I have the chat up, so be able to check to see as people are doing their introductions. As Sonali mentioned, I'm coming at this from a medical education standpoint background. So especially, I know we have a mixed audience here, some people from IT, not necessarily people doing medical education, but as she mentioned, I am hoping that we'll be able to hit on at least if nothing else, give you some context for ways that I'm advocating the incorporation of GenAI into medical education and how I'm thinking about it and the training that I'm doing with medical educators, as well as just some of the ways that you could generally think about incorporating it into your teaching or administrative workflows. But certainly for the AI experts in the room, I'm not going to be teaching you anything you don't know about GenAI. So, so with that, I want to thank you again for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here and talk and learn with all of you today. I don't have any conflicts of interest to declare. So when I set off starting to plan this session, something I thought was very appropriate would be to ask ChatGPT what would be a good use of everyone's time. So this is the prompt that I gave ChatGPT, and I'll be referencing primarily ChatGPT as the LLM that I've been using a lot today, but I'll mention a few other different tools and models throughout the presentation. But here you can say, you know, I basically asked it if I'm a busy medical educator and I signed up for this webinar, you know, weeks ago, as we all tend to do, and then the day arrives and your meetings get hectic or your schedule is crazy, and now I'm kind of thinking, oh, maybe I could watch the recording later. You know, what would be your advice, ChatGPT, for how we could make this a worthwhile session? And so I also just want to note before showing the responses that I have collated a number of resources that are linked through this presentation. I'll send the slides afterwards. One of those resources is this prompt documentation document. I can show you briefly here. Throughout the presentation, I will be showing output from generative AI that I've incorporated into the presentation. And to further the learning value here, I've put all of the original prompts that I used to generate that material into this prompt documentation resource, so that you can use that as a reference later if you're curious how we arrived at these specific outputs. And all of the prompt numbers will be numbered down here. They're numbered in the document and cross-referenced with slides, so you can easily find what corresponds to what. Okay, so this is what ChatGPT said: 5 attributes of a worthwhile webinar on medical education innovation using GenAI, looking for clear time-saving applications of GenAI, some live demonstrations perhaps with practical examples, effective prompting strategies in the context of med-ed, balanced discussion of AI's benefits and limitations, and valuable take-home resources. So while I do think this was a bit ambitious for an hour seminar, especially the live demos part, we're not going to do that as much, although if we have time at the end, I do have a few windows up and ready to go in case people wanted to do some live demoing of prompts or with Google LM or the Notebook LM that I'm going to mention at the end. Otherwise, I am hoping that we will have done a nice job of hitting on these other points to make it worthwhile for everyone's time. So in service of the things that will make it worthwhile for you, my learning objectives that I set out for this session were really that at the end of it, I hope that participants would be able to identify ways that generative AI tools can be helpful for medical educators. Especially, I've been approaching it from this standpoint of what are the barriers that medical educators and educators more broadly face in terms of developing and delivering theory-informed and evidence-based educational offerings, whether that is in the classroom or in the hospitals, residency programs, or even informal learning opportunities and settings. Should be able to discuss some strategies for engaging learners and medical educators with GenAI, and to kind of illustrate this in a very concrete way. Part of the talk, I'm going to take a little detour to give kind of a detailed vignette of an application that I've used to incorporate GenAI into my own teaching. And so I'm hoping to illustrate some of these points there from the lens of both learners and medical educators, and to motivate some of that work. And then again, there is really an emphasis on being able to apply effective prompting strategies for GenAI tools into your own work in order to leverage GenAI into the instructional design process, as well as some of the other kind of peripheral administrative aspects of teaching and education as well. So just to check in, and I see some people are starting to put their introductions into the chat, so thank you for that. I just wanted to get a sense of who was in the room, and I promise I'm not going to ask you too many interactive things throughout the session, but if you are willing or able to either use, if your camera's on, which I don't see many cameras on, you could use your fingers in the camera, but otherwise just put in the chat to give me a sense of who's here. To what extent are you familiar with GenAI tools like ChatGPT for applications in medical education? And so you go from 1 to 5. 1 would be you've heard of these tools but haven't really used them. 5 would be you thoroughly integrate GenAI tools like ChatGPT into your work and educational work if you're an educator, or other types of work if you're not. So if you want to just put numbers in the chat, can get a sense of who's in the room. I'll give you a second to do that in case anyone wants to. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, fantastic. So we have a good range, leaning a little bit more towards some familiarity. So that's great. We can have some discussion at the end, but we do have a range of people in the room, so that'll be helpful. Okay, so in terms of way of introduction, then, just starting off, what is generative AI? This is a good example of ways in which we can use GenAI tools to individualize or kind of tailor content to different audiences. So rather than just give a single definition for what is GenAI, I can consider in this context the responses of the people in the group between novice to expert, and then prompt ChatGPT is what I used to give me definitions based on different levels of expertise. So for example, if we're going to define GenAI for the experts in the room, you can probably parse a definition that talks about using deep learning models, trained on vast data sets. It's talking about probabilistic patterns to generate new content. And then here it provides some applications in medical education, such as adaptive learning, refining clinical simulations, more personalized, scalable, and efficient instructional strategies. So kind of these big picture challenges that we're trying to address in medical education. At the more novice end of things, a simpler definition would be that GenAI is a type of artificial intelligence that creates new content like text or images based on patterns learned from data. So you can see the simplification there. And it still gives a little bit of insight into how it's working by making predictions. And it gives some specific applications as well, like summaries, generating questions, or generating case simulations. But again, you can see here it's kind of immediate applications as perhaps giving this broad context for the overall challenges that we might be facing in medical education, such as personalized education. And then a definition somewhere in the middle. You can see here, splits the difference between those two, talks about predictions and large data sets. And in terms of what we can do with it, it is similarly kind of scaled for in the middle there, automating case generation, summarizing research, some different tasks, starting to talk about personalizing learning. And one thing that I noted was kind of interesting from the response for this intermediate zone is it kind of guides us on some things you need to be aware of. That maybe as a novice, maybe you're not starting to think immediately about the fact that you have to craft your prompts, well in order to get quality output, these ideas of how to actually refine your use. So again, someone with some expertise to say you're using it, but how can you make it better? Could do it through iterative refinement, for example, and critical oversight. So here is just an example, and this was one of the instances I mentioned at the beginning that I'm hoping throughout this talk to kind of model some of these applications as an extra layer for you to get ideas for how you might use this in your own work. Okay, so in terms of common GenAI tools and models, and again, we have expertise in the room, and I am not from an IT background, so this is not my area of expertise, but just to put some names out there of things that people are generally using, colleagues that I know who are working in the medical education space. The most common one, certainly in my local ecosystem, is ChatGPT. That is in part facilitated by the IT infrastructure that we have at Harvard Medical School. Our students and faculty have access to a sandbox version that you can play around and test in. And we also have an enterprise license that I've been able to get access to. It's accessible on a more limited basis because I currently have funding to work on a grant to develop AI tools for medical education. So that certainly my colleagues and I are primarily using that, but there are other great tools available as well. Gemini is the Google equivalent, Copilot that's integrated into Microsoft. It really is focused in the Microsoft Office suite, focused on productivity tasks. And then Claude had also been one early on that we were doing a lot of comparisons in the output between ChatGPT and Claude output, and Claude was known kind of for more creative writing. Again, I haven't used that one nearly as much, but it's fairly common among my colleagues as well. So just to segue into the specific applications for GenAI tools in the context of medical education, as Sonali introduced, I really view the overall goal of this being that we need to train our medical educators and our trainees, future medical educators, future physicians, to be able to effectively and efficiently leverage these Gen AI tools in innovative ways to address challenges in medical education and medicine in a responsible and ethical way. And I view these tools as really a way to enhance our work or enhance our learning as opposed to replace us, or it's human or AI. I really see it as being a mutualistic relationship. And the quote that was alluded to earlier, hoping that both we can leverage the technology for good, and such as by promoting equity in the classroom, as well as by allowing us to take advantage of the convenience and the efficiency that this technology provides to free up our time to do really the meaningful work that we enjoy. So that's kind of my overall framing. And just to say that this has certainly been a topic of discussion in the medical education literature. There are a number of perspective pieces, scoping articles that have been published in recent years. Here, I'm showing an image or a figure from this paper from 2023, which seems like ancient times now in generative AI timescales. But here are some of the potential benefits that these authors identified for Gen AI in the context of medical education. So dynamic content generation, we'll come back to a number of these later in the talk. Improving student evaluations through real-time feedback, customizing learning. Other applications in the medical education side are generating simulated patient scenarios. We can use it to enhance our research, whether it's in the context of education research or biomedical research more generally, whether it's reviewing literature, summarizing information, synthesizing information, and then of course on the medical side as well, health information dissemination and how we're actually facilitating global medicine can also be enhanced through AI tools. Of course, any conversation around Gen AI needs to include a discussion of the very real challenges and ethical considerations that we as a field have not yet figured out, and this is going to continue to be something that we all have to be mindful of. It's multifaceted, so this summary diagram nicely highlights a few of the different areas. And again, we don't have time to take deep dives into all of these tonight, but happy to follow up with anyone who has specific interests. But just to give a high-level overview, some of the things that are coming up, the challenges and ethical concerns. So one is just the quality of AI-generated content. I'm going to showcase, throughout this presentation, ways that I've used it, output from Gen AI, but certainly we need to be able to continue to develop the skills that we can rigorously assess the quality of output, and we still need that human oversight to make sure that there aren't mistakes being made. There are known biases in the AI systems due to the training sets, data sets that have been used. And so this has potential, obviously, to reinforce stereotypes, discriminatory behavior, et cetera. I mentioned in that quote earlier that I also see this as an opportunity for us to really be considering how we can leverage GenAI to mitigate some of our own human biases that also exist in the classroom and in our workplace, even without technology. And so I'll touch on that a little bit later on. There are a number of legal concerns about, the intellectual property rights of materials that were used to train these systems, data privacy, misuse or misrepresentation of AI-generated content, how we're distributing copyrighted information, et cetera. And then this has also posed challenges in terms of academic dishonesty, both kind of having to redefine and remind people what the definition of plagiarism is or academic dishonesty in general, what are acceptable uses of GenAI in the workplace, in academic writing, in our professional activities in the classroom. It really necessitates clear communication of expectations in all of these different spaces, and we are trying to grapple with it, as a field. For example, some hot topics that I know if you talk to people, you talk to different colleagues, I get very different responses. Things like, is it okay to use GenAI to generate essays for our medical school or graduate school applications? And generally speaking, everyone says absolutely not. But then if you ask, is it okay to use generative AI to generate letters of recommendation? I have seen a much wider perception on whether that is okay or not. Things like, writing articles for publication versus being a reviewer. All of these things our field is grappling with. So I just want to highlight that, and we'll come back to a few of these things towards the end. I know this text is a little small, but I just wanted to put this in the presentation because it gives a number of useful citations. Again, this is from a different kind of scoping article about how can we integrate generative AI into medical education. And what I liked about how they structured this was that they talked about recommendations, not just for individual educators, but also for institutions to think about how we can facilitate this. And it's nice to see on the call here that we have a wide variety of positions and departments represented, because I do think this is going to be a whole kind of institutional community effort in order to bring this technology into our work in a meaningful way. So the level of individual educators, certainly finding ways to increase just knowledge about AI, understanding the current landscape of how it's being used, reviewing strategies to successfully integrate AI into education, and then again, being mindful of these ethical considerations is important. And at the institutional level, I alluded to on the last slide, the need to define and then revise policies as the technology changes, as we gain kind of a greater understanding of how we want to be using it, supporting faculty development about AI and providing resources for teaching, which I hope if I hit on one of these things tonight, I hope it's that one. And then also offering information checking tools for plagiarism. It's become very challenging. Some of my colleagues in IT basically say impossible to detect at this point what is AI generated versus not, just based on the content. And so how we have to be thinking about that, especially in disciplines or courses or settings where writing is a major component of the learning, is something we have to grapple with. Okay, so as I mentioned, I want to take a few minutes to just briefly describe a vignette from my own work. Like I said, I think this nicely highlights I can highlight through this story my own motivations and kind of motivations for doing this work, and also the specific context that I used that I'm going to be talking about here is a graduate course for medical educators enrolled in the Master's of Medical Education program at Harvard Medical School. So what's really great about this course is that I get to introduce and experiment with GenAI with medical educators who are experiencing it from the student perspective, the learner perspective, because they're in my course, but our conversations are always centered around what are the implications for you as educators. So getting to switch back and forth between those two hats, the wearing the hat of the learner versus the hat of the educator, I think is really helpful and has led to some cool insights that I'm excited to share with you here. So just briefly, kind of the motivation for incorporating GenAI, as I've been talking about the past few minutes here, GenAI is already revolutionizing medical education, but we've identified that medical educators really need to be trained how to effectively use GenAI for various professional activities, including instructional design. And I really focused on instructional design here because this is something that in order to incorporate theory-informed and evidence-based educational practices into our educational offerings, that often causes barriers, knowledge barriers in terms of, what are the evidence-based practices, what are the relevant educational theories that can be overwhelming, as well as time barriers of even if I know all of the great educational theories and I know which pedagogical approaches are effective for learning, if I already have lecture slides that I've been using for a decade, there's a big time barrier in order to rework a course or a lecture, for example. So again, to try to get at developing these skills with medical educators for how you might use GenAI to facilitate these activities, I leveraged this specific course that I mentioned called Teaching 100, The Science of Teaching and Learning at Harvard Medical School. And in particular, we had a capstone assignment in the course where to apply their knowledge of educational theories and evidence-based pedagogical practices, our students design their own syllabus and an individual lesson plan of their own choosing for either a real or a hypothetical course as the final assessment in the course. And so I saw that as a good opportunity to start integrating some of this work with GenAI. Here, let me just walk you through the approach for how we did this because it was a little complicated how it interfaced with the capstone assignment. So the students created a syllabus as well as a lesson plan that corresponded to an individual class session from that course that they designed the syllabus for. And then there was an additional component to the assignment that was relevant for what I'm going to talk about now, which is that students are also asked to annotate their syllabus and assignment, indicating how they applied concepts from our course into that assignment. So this is how I can further engage them in kind of this metacognitive thinking of metacognitive awareness of what theories was I applying and why, because we asked them to kind of give their rationale to further demonstrate their learning. So that was what they have always done in the class, and that was what they did to start. But what was new about this intervention was that after they created annotations themselves, we asked them to use just on the lesson plan that they had created, because the full syllabus was a bit unwieldy, to use a generative AI tool of their choice to annotate the lesson plan. We were very vague at this point, deliberately so, in terms of how we told them to do that. And I'll go into that more detail in a minute. Students then received feedback. Both they got the feedback from GenAI about the annotations that they asked it to create, and then I provided feedback on the prompt that they had used for their GenAI annotation. So I asked them to submit to me what was the prompt that you used, what model did you use, and what was the output, and they returned that to me. We then, at this stage, provided some scaffolded instruction on prompt engineering. And this was the first time throughout the course that we explicitly talked about how to design prompts for generative AI. Then we asked them to redo their annotations, so create a second prompt for GenAI to create annotations on their same lesson plan. And then we asked them a series of individual reflection questions to reflect on the activity specifically, as well as their use with GenAI in the course more broadly. We evaluated the effectiveness of this instructional intervention using the Kirkpatrick model. Just briefly, if you're not familiar with it, the Kirkpatrick model talks about different levels and different types of data, outcome data that you can collect to evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention. At level 1 are the reactions. So we got this information from the students' metacognitive reflections to say what were their insights about the activity. And also we were assessing, do they see the relevance of doing this, of practicing prompt engineering, of using GenAI for their professional activities as medical educators. Then at the level of learning, we assess learning based on the actual quality of the prompts that students submitted at the initial time point, as well as the revised prompts after they received instruction on effective prompt engineering strategies. And then at the level 3, we assessed the planned behaviors that students said that they would incorporate into their own instructional practices based on the generative AI feedback they received with the annotations. So after that second step, we asked them, you've gotten some annotations from GenAI. What's an actionable item that you could do to actually incorporate something that it suggested to make your instructional design better? So that was how we evaluated whether or not this worked. So just briefly, for the scoring of the prompts, we did do this numerically. We scored the prompts for inclusion of 5 different criteria modified from this article authored by Heston and Kuhn, where they set out different frameworks for developing effective prompts for generative AI. And these briefly were the goal. So what's the goal of the query for GenAI? Are you asking for information or specifying particular information or voice, such as you are to assume the role of a medical educator, for example? Providing information about the desired output or format of that output, as well as providing relevant context, such as in this case, the details for the course that their lesson plan corresponded to, and any relevant pedagogical or theoretical frameworks that they wanted referenced. The 2 steps, as I mentioned, initially when we asked them, use GenAI, a tool of your choice, to create annotations, we literally gave them no guidance beyond that. It was just prompt a GenAI tool. I will say that all of the students, even though having free choice of which tool to use, they all used different ChatGPT models, either the free version available at the time or the pro version. And then at this second stage, after they had received feedback from us on the quality of their prompts, they also received structured guidance on how to develop prompts. And so I'm showing that guidance here also as a useful framework for anyone on this call who is looking for structured resources for how to develop prompts. So this was kind of the scaffolding we walk them through. These are the steps you should think about when you're designing prompts. And then we ask them to develop a new prompt to generate a second round of annotations on their lesson plan. So here were the data from our study. What I'm showing here is an estimation plot showing each circle here represents a student. So these are paired data points for the same student before and after the instruction that we gave them on prompt engineering. The mean for the pre-scores was just a little bit above 1. I think it was 1.4. That average across the class went up to 4 after the instruction. And here on the right, you can see the difference in means between the post versus the pre-scores. Each dot here, again, as a student. The mean is shown here, so just a little bit above 2 with the 95% confidence interval shown. And so with this confidence interval excluding 0, our difference between the post and the pre-scores was statistically significant. And so this gave us confidence that our instruction on how to develop effective prompts was actually effective in impacting students' learning to how to develop effective prompts. Just to give you a sense of what those prompts look like, and these are just some examples. There were variations, of course, between the pre and the post prompts. One of the most bare bone pre-prompts that we saw was this: could you please help me generate annotations for my lesson plan? Which very much mirrored the very vague instructions we had given students. Compare that to a post prompt. I need you to annotate my syllabus for me. I'm looking for areas of improvement. There's a specific goal regarding my learning objectives and assessments, targeting specific areas of the lesson plan, additional questions and context. It mentioned a particular rubric that it should reference in generating the feedback. and gave relevant context about the students in the course, for example. So that's just to give you a sense of some of the, on the extremes, this was a score of a 1 or a 0, and this would have been a score of a 4 or a 5. And just to say, among those 5 different dimensions that I mentioned that we were scoring for inclusion in the prompts, goal, information, voice, output, and the course context, this is the distribution of what you can see. The black represents the percentage of the prompts that included that dimension, either before or after instruction on prompt engineering. So you can see, for example, that the most clearly and commonly omitted dimension was that none of the students specified an output format initially, saying, generate a list or generate bullet points or a paragraph summary or anything like that. So information like this is helpful to us as educators to identify, what are the actual gaps in knowledge that we would want to target with instruction in prompt engineering, for example. And then you can see afterwards there was encouragingly strong improvement across all of these dimensions, though it wasn't 100%, right? Showing that we did still see some variation in students' prompts. So it wasn't like we had given them a foolproof recipe that everybody followed. Just briefly, the details of this aren't super important, but I do just kind of want to give you a sense of the types of information we can get from piloting specific interventions using GenAI in our classrooms. So I'm going to just summarize a few of the main results that we found. Again, analyzing students' written responses. So this was descriptive analysis that I will say we did by hand. I did also additionally play around with, putting responses into our secure enterprise account of ChatGPT to just see how the theme analysis compared to my own. But I will say everything reported here was the manual data analysis that myself and my collaborator, Dr. Christina Fisher, did. So I want to acknowledge Christina's work on this project as well. So just briefly, how did our students, and again, our students here are medical educators themselves, how did they respond? They reported or they recognized that the quality of their annotations correlates with the quality of their prompts. So they were reporting here, the prompt was, how did you see the quality of the annotations changing between the first and the second round of prompting? And they reported that my annotations improved. Specifically, they became more specific, they were richer in content, and they were more useful. So this demonstrates that our medical educators and our learners appreciate the relationship between input and output of quality of prompt. General insights, our students reported that they found AI to be useful. They identify the importance of prompt engineering and prompt quality for generating quality output. They also were aware of some of the limitations of AI. And this was also really important for us to recognize because, again, we don't want to be pitching GenAI as this foolproof, 100% magical technology. So that was nice that organically emerged. They also identified the importance of teaching and learning how to optimize prompts and use GenAI, and they saw the usefulness and applicability of this assignment for their professional training. And then overall, we asked, did you find that these GenAI activities enhanced your learning in the course? Most of the students said yes, it did. And specifically, we identified a few different ways in which students reported it was helpful. One, they learned how to more effectively use GenAI because it was a hands-on experiential learning activity. They were provided exposure to and practice with this technology that they deemed to be important for their training. And they found that that AI itself was a useful tool to reinforce concepts from the course. And then finally, just to mention, what were some of the behaviors that the students said that they would apply based on the AI feedback to their own educational practices? They saw AI as being useful for a brainstorming tool, refining aspects of their lesson plans, incorporating specific instructional suggestions. AI is a tool to foster metacognition, so thinking about what you've done and justifying your underlying thought process, and then finding ways to optimize how to use AI more effectively. Okay, so with that, like I said, I just wanted to take a few minutes to go into that deep dive. to demonstrate a very concrete application of how we did this. And again, the benefit of this was that the students got to participate as learners, learning how to use the technology, but then also thinking about how this applied to their professional work as medical educators. So we found that the incorporation of GenAI did enhance their learning. We did see learning gains as assessed by the scores of the prompt quality, and the educators did identify specific applications to their own work. All right, so now back to all of you. What are some applications, tools, and tips that you can use in your work? So I want to just highlight here a few of the wide possible space. I tried to organize this and come up with a few different ways to really give as many concrete suggestions as I could. Because just speaking from myself, one thing that I've been trying to do over the past few years was to develop what I called the GenAI reflex, that whenever I'd sit down to try to do a task that I would normally do, I was trying to develop that habit of mind of, can I use AI to help me with this in some way, to just develop that as kind of a reflex. And so many of the things that I'm putting on here are things that I had been practicing developing as a reflex. So just to kind of give you a walk through some of my approach to this as well. So organizing this according to the design phase, how you implement your course, and then also reflection and analysis after your educational sorry, I'm gonna try to not have those blue boxes show up. How you reflect on and analyze your previous courses, just giving some specific examples here. And just to highlight that there are good uses here for GenAI, whether you're designing de novo, so you're creating a brand new course, syllabus, lesson plan, or if you're revising existing materials. So I just wanted to give a few concrete examples for both of those. So of course, de novo, you can brainstorm any aspect of your course, whether it's outline a syllabus, outline a lesson plan, what topics should I include, what could my learning objectives be, how should I structure this 1-hour seminar on GenAI, what instructional approaches might be useful for a class of residents as opposed to undergraduates, for example. On the revise side, you can ask for feedback or edits on uploaded materials. We'll touch on this again in terms of you do have to think about privacy and security of these different models for what you're uploading. But at least for me, I am fortunate right now that we have this sandbox and this enterprise account that anything that we upload has greater privacy protections and is not getting used to train these models. So I can and do feel comfortable uploading some of my materials to say, here's a lecture slide deck, for example. Can you identify opportunities where I could incorporate active learning? And so it does that. You can ask it to design assessments or align assessments to specific learning goals or learning objectives that you've already defined. You can modify those learning objectives. You can generate materials, again, going back to the de novo, you can generate materials, ask it to create quizzes, handouts, case scenarios, study guides, rubrics, you name it. ChatGPT, again, right now has much enhanced capabilities compared to even a year ago, and I know their next model is coming out now soon as well. It'll probably be even better. You can, for example, and I have a few examples of this that I'm sharing in the materials for this webinar, generate and now download PDFs, Microsoft Word documents, Microsoft Excel documents. They don't do PowerPoint presentations yet, but I'm hopeful that in the future they could do that. And then from a revised standpoint, or a de novo as well, being able to summarize books and articles to assess the relevance to the work. So just as one example of something that when I was developing my reflex, there was a book that I had seen pop up online. It seemed like it might be relevant to my Teaching 100 course. I didn't know if I wanted to buy the book or if I'd had time to read the book. So I just put into ChatGPT, here's the title of the book. Can you give me a chapter by chapter summary and highlight connecting concepts that could be applicable to my Teaching 100 course? And I gave it a description of the course that I was teaching, and it was fantastic. It gave me a high level, brief, chapter by chapter summary, and it highlighted relevant theoretical and educational frameworks that I already incorporate into my course, or identified new ones that I could incorporate. And so again, using the kind of expert knowledge that I bring and the domain expertise of education, I could very quickly assess the quality of the output in terms of the educational frameworks it was suggesting made sense. So that's just a few examples of what you can do on the design side. In terms of implementation, I've given a few different examples here, both of kind of regards to the course content itself. So here is something where in real time, kind of like what I did in this session with demonstrating the different definitions for GenAI, depending on the learner expertise, you can individualize instructional materials for your specific learners once you know who's in the course. You can identify themes or misconceptions from student work or discussion board posts or assignments, things like that, to facilitate so-called just-in-time teaching, meaning the adjustments that you're making on the fly to better tailor your teaching towards the current level of understanding for your learners. There are also a number of administrative tasks that this can be helpful with. So for example, one thing, and I did provide this as a resource that you can download, asking it to a prompt about, generate timelines or checklists for me and my teaching assistant for all the tasks that we need to do in order to get our Canvas page set up and administratively prepare for a Zoom meeting where we're going to be teaching, 100 students online. And so you can see the types of things it comes up with minimal effort on my part. I didn't spend hours optimizing these prompts, but I did, just create something simply for you to get a sense of a starting point. And then similarly, you can draft or modify email templates, especially if they're the types of emails that you send out every year to your class or emails that you send every year to schedule faculty members. I know many of my colleagues already, we have catalogs of email templates that we've crafted over the years. And so this is also something that you could use GenAI to help you with. And then again, for the kind of after your teaching, during or after, how do we reflect and analyze on what we've done? You can use GenAI to draft feedback surveys or reflection exercises, analyzing or summarizing student feedback and work, again, with the privacy considerations that we'll come back to in a minute. You can document the evolution of your own materials over time. So if you have been tinkering with your syllabus year in, year out, and you have a bunch of syllabi that you now want to get feedback from or summarize, what have been the changes that I've made over the past decade that I wasn't even aware of, for example? It can be useful to provide high-level feedback like that. And then this relates to that earlier point for how can we actually, while being aware that these generative AI tools themselves do have biases and can be problematic, how can we actually use GenAI to promote equity in the classroom and to maybe counteract some of the biases? And so some of the ways that I've found to do it that have been really helpful are, for example, analyzing my course materials through kind of an equity audit lens, and that can take on many different dimensions. So for example, looking at my reading lists and seeing which types of authors are represented or not represented in my reading lists, and can you help me identify other scholars in this field that might represent greater global diversity, for example, or institutional diversity, or maybe we're interested in assessing our course materials. How do these materials stack up against these accessibility guidelines that my institution has put out? And so you can upload particular documents or guidelines or policies about, expectations for universal design principles, for example, that your learning materials should abide by, and then you can ask an AI tool to help you assess where you stand. You can also use generative AI, again, for brainstorming areas that we as individuals might not have expertise in, such as providing examples in our teaching that reflect, cultural awareness or cultural humility in our teaching. So we can use particular topics and say, generate 5 different examples that reflect, culturally responsive responses to this patient, or that reflect, examples that aren't, strictly North America centric or something like that. So these are a few of the ways that and I know a few of my other colleagues have been using GenAI to try to actually combat against some biases that we all bring to our work innately. So in terms of developing effective prompts, I already introduced the resource from this Heston and Kuhn article, kind of the scaffolded instruction that we provided to our students in Teaching 100. That was kind of a way to walk through how to design prompts. I also, just as another example of how you can use GenAI to help you with this, I have a downloadable prompt worksheet that I'll send with the materials for this slide. That again, you can see it walks you through different steps for how to practice developing prompts. There are also now, I'm listing just two here, but there are a number of publicly available prompt libraries where people who have been working in the education space, as well as other areas, academic administration or business, have published these libraries of prompts that are good starting places to use in your work. And this was the article I mentioned previously. In addition to those general resources, again, we don't have time to go through all of these, but I just wanted to say there's another example. Here was a very quick prompt that I've included in my prompt library for all of you, as well as the output showing, again, more concrete applications for medical educators, as well as how learners can use GenAI to enhance their learning in the course. So highlighting, again, a number of concrete applications, as well as specific prompts to start with that. I will say I haven't tested any of these prompts, so they may all be terrible, but at least it's a starting point. The last thing I want to say about prompting here is don't get discouraged if you're totally new to this. We didn't have too many people who were very new, but if you are new, don't get discouraged, because even over the past year, the capabilities of these models and their intrinsic logic has just gotten so much stronger. So for example, here's, a very nice multi-step. Here's how you can, use GenAI in your teaching, in your educational work. And the prompt for this was nothing fancy. It was, help, I don't know how to start. So just as an example that even something like that can actually generate a lot of content. And increasingly now, at least with the ChatGPT models, they are often producing these next step type things at the end of their output. So here is like, would you like me to help? Would you like help designing a specific teaching activity? So now you can just say yes. And so the model itself is kind of generating suggestions for next steps, even if you don't know what those would be. I did want to briefly mention, and this was in the description for this session as well, this idea of custom GPTs. I didn't make this a huge focus just because in order to create custom GPTs yourself, like through the ChatGPT builder, you actually have to have a paid version of ChatGPT. But I did want to mention them here because you just with the free account can access GPTs created by others. So for example, from their free account, you can go to the GPT store. I just searched here, GPTs that focus on course design. You can then click into the chatbot here where it actually prompts you with some example prompts that the person who configured this custom GPT sets, some example prompts to start the conversation. So this can also be an easy entry point if you don't know where to begin. And again, these GPTs, when you search for them, they come up based on popularity and there are ratings in the GPT store. So you can kind of get a sense of if they're good or not, with the caveat that they are a little bit black boxy and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but that's a limitation of all of these LLMs in general. So I already mentioned this. You can use the custom GPTs for free, even if you have the free account, but you have to have a paid account if you want to build them. And a limitation is if you are using an enterprise account, these custom GPTs that you build on the enterprise account cannot be shared publicly. So I found that to be a limitation of my own work and was unable to share my beautiful custom GPTs with you today. We focused a lot on ChatGPT. I just want to briefly in these last few slides mention that, of course, this is very much a tip of the iceberg. I don't even know if it's positioned as the tip, but there is a wide range of tools out there. I mentioned that a limitation of ChatGPT right now is that you cannot create slide presentations. There are a number of other tools out there to varying degrees of free or not that can help you do that. So that's one example of other type of work we're doing that is it squarely in the GenAI space. Of course, there are many other types of things we're doing, summarizing research articles, doing analysis of data. There are lots of different tools available. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those tools here for you. And finally, as an additional concrete application, outside of ChatGPT is this Google Notebook LM that I found to be really cool in the education space. It definitely has some limitations, and so I thought this was a nice opportunity to highlight both the wow factor, but also the limitations. So briefly, what this is you create a notebook where you can upload source materials. Here, what I uploaded was the slide deck for this presentation. It then generates a summary. And the cool kind of unique feature of this is that it also generates an audio summary done in the style of a podcast. So I just want to let you listen to a few seconds of this, because if you haven't heard this, it's really striking. This going.
Use these new technologies to really stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. And that's a really big question that Dr. Tan tackled in her seminar.
Okay.
So she kicked off her seminar with a question that I think a lot of us can relate to.
Sure.
Imagine you're a busy medical educator, totally swamped with work, but you're curious about AI.
Yeah.
What would make a webinar on this topic worth your precious time?
Okay, so I'm not going to have you listen to all of it, obviously. It's about 17 minutes long. I did link the audio summary file here at risk of immense embarrassment to myself, because I will say this audio podcast summary has a much higher impression of me than I do. So keep that in mind. But I did think it was worthwhile linking it here, because as you have sat through this entire seminar now, you are well positioned to nicely identify inaccuracies that emerge from this audio summary. So I think that this audio summary really nicely highlights both what's really cool about this technology, but you'll also, if you listen to this full thing, you'll be able to see some places where they got it wrong. And so I thought that would be a useful learning resource for anyone who's interested. But just to say, with this Notebook LM, in addition to generating that audio summary, it also generates tools such as study guides with quiz questions, answer keys, essay prompts. So as an educator, you can upload materials and then have it generate questions that you might want to use as assessments for students. As a student, you can upload course materials like PowerPoint slide decks, generate study guides for yourself. So it's pretty cool. This is the last slide, I think, content. I know we're a minute over, so sorry about that. But just to say, I want to just touch on this fact. Again, this was supported by ChatGPT in summarizing these suggestions. There were a lot of aspects of the responsible and ethical use of GenAI that we're not covering here, but just to talk about a few of the points about the intellectual property and student privacy, because they're very relevant when we're talking about, oh, go ahead and upload your course materials to an AI tool, or upload student comments to synthesize their feedback about how they did. These are some concerns. So what can you do if you don't have access to an enterprise account to ChatGPT, for example, where the data are subject to higher privacy controls, and also the data are not being trained are not being used for further model training, which is a concern, and certainly like with HIPAA, that's a big concern. So a few things you could do. One is use AI tools that don't retain the data for training. So there is a temporary chat mode in ChatGPT that doesn't save inputs. There are also open source models that in this document that I'm linking on this slide, there are a number of specific models named that either run locally on your machine or have private modes, so that your data that you're putting in are not being used to train these models. Avoid uploading student data or proprietary materials. So you can summarize responses and put the summary in as opposed to uploading directly student assignments. And certainly you would want to scrub any identifiable information from documents. Using AI as a thought partner instead of a content repository. So I talked about uploading like my course syllabus and asking for feedback on it. But if you're concerned about doing that or don't have access to one of these safer, more private tools, you could instead ask GenAI to generate suggestions or brainstorming for what could a syllabus on, the theory and science of teaching look like, for example. Exploring local or institutionally supported AI tools, and oops, there's a typo there, sandbox environments, using AI to generate things, not analyze it, so similar to the suggestion up there. So asking it to create structured outlines instead of providing feedback. And then another general recommendation here is to make sure, again, that you're developing institution-specific guidelines for the use of AI, and then consider using AI for low-risk tasks. So again, those things like generating multiple choice quizzes, generating email templates. There are still a lot of ways that even if you absolutely do not want to upload any of your own material or your students' material into a GenAI tool, that you can still get a lot of good use out of that. I know we're at time, so I'm going to skip this, but if you want to share afterwards, you can go into this Google Doc and let me know how you're planning on using what we talked about. I want to thank you for your time. Again, thank you for having me. Sorry to go over a few minutes. I'm happy to stay on a few minutes to take questions if anyone wants to stick around.
Thank you so much, Tari. This was a lot of information, and I'm so impressed that you have collated a set of documents for us to leave us with them so that we can continue exploring. We are past time, so anybody who wants to leave, thank you so much for joining us, and we will upload the presentation on YouTube. Anybody who wants to stay for a few minutes, since Tari, you can stay a little bit longer, we can maybe have a few questions if anyone wants to stay and people have questions.
I can ask a quick question. I'm a neurologist here at UW, and I, participate in clinical trainee education.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like a key gap today in, clinical practice among trainees as well as even practicing physicians is poor clinical reasoning skills and poor ability to critically appraise the medical literature. A lot of people in clinical medicine don't have the background in epidemiology or biostatistics.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have found using, how have you found, I guess, the use of things like ChatGPT or open evidence or other language model tools to help build these skills amongst trainees?
Yeah. So so on the clinical side, and I will say I don't have much firsthand experience with this, but seeing how it's been used by other people, I know that really a useful feature is by uploading, whether it's like case, the practice case studies, or, in some case, GenAI is being used obviously to generate case studies as well. But then asking it to differentiate or to come up with questions specifically to target different skills. So I've seen it used, for example, to practice helping develop clinical reasoning around uncertainty, that you can ask it for a given case study to generate questions or to engage in kind of a conversation with the user, specifically with an eye towards infusing uncertainty and challenging the other person to deal with that, basically. So I think that's one way in that, like, developing the critical thinking skills, is it is nice that you can kind of make very tailored responses. And what I've started doing a little bit with research articles is trying to achieve multiple learning objectives from the same, set of experiments or the same data figure or something like that. I can ask, the learning goal or the learning objective for this assignment is to have students to be able to correctly describe the parts of a graph, provide some questions how I might ask students to do this, or how might I structure my class if my learning objective is X, as opposed to, okay, now I want students to actually synthesize the results from 2 contradictory studies, help me brainstorm how I could structure a 30-minute discussion to highlight that. And so I've been able to get some good ideas that way, either in terms of like the types of questions I should be asking or instructional activities. So that's one thing I'd say is like critical thinking, even in the non-clinical space. Critical thinking skills is something that we're thinking a lot about in the PhD education side too. So those are a few ways that I've been using it. And then the other thing I'll just mention real quick is I mentioned this emphasis on metacognition, and I personally feel that all of the GenAI work that I do with my students, I want them engaging in metacognitive reflection as well. And so that would be the other, I guess, thing I would suggest here is finding opportunities that even as we're incorporating GenAI into it, to use it to prompt, for example, generate 3 reflection questions that I need to answer to allow me to track my learning and development in critical thinking, for example, would be a way. I haven't done that yet, but just on the fly, to try to get at this and really to try to design assignments that protect against, I can just put this in GenAI and spit out an answer and I haven't had to think. So those are a few thoughts. I don't know if that got at what you were asking, but.
That does. Thanks. I am wondering what you think with regards to with regards to the rate of improvement, right, in these language and multimodal models is so fast. I'm kind of curious what you think, should be the research priorities in this field, because comparing one model to another, or even the use of how it's applied in the medical education space, the needs change so fast because the models change so fast.
Yeah.
I wonder how you think about that and how you approach that in your own work.
Yeah, so definitely comparing across models, that was an idea that colleagues and I had a while ago for one of these education research projects. And we quickly abandoned it because of the time thing. It just became apparent as we were, we're trying to optimize this prompt for ChatGPT and, Claude at the same time. And over the span of the last, 6 months that we were working on it, like there have just been so many changes that I personally think so how I'm approaching it in my own work is I'm kind of picking a tool. If there's any sort of optimization, trying to, focus on one model at a time, and then I could assess how it compares across others for use cases. But I think it probably, my sense is that for my own stuff that I'm probably going to focus on, designing it in a much more targeted way as opposed to trying to design universal solutions. Because I think, not only is each model advancing very quickly, but they're all advancing at different rates too. So I think it'd be really hard to say, I want to design this thing that's going to work equally well, however you define that with your outcomes, across Claude and, Gemini and, ChatGPT. In terms of assessing the skills we need and how do we think about this, I will say, I'm still grappling with this. I don't have an answer because even this point, I mentioned, ChatGPT has just gotten so much better. And as one example, the research project that I didn't talk about in this seminar, but that I got funding for through HMS that we're working on, is to develop basically an AI-based syllabus builder tool for instructors. So kind of a riff off of the work that I had done in my Teaching 100 course, where we were having students develop prompts that are effective to help evaluate their instructional materials and then ultimately generate them. We wanted to create a tool that was kind of, where we hit all the prompts on the back end so that you could take a faculty member who doesn't have that the subject matter expertise for what are the relevant educational theoretical frameworks, but you could still get them to that finish line of a high quality student-centered syllabus that incorporates evidence-based practices. We've been working on this project for about a year, and even 6 months ago, we were hitting this wall where ChatGPT was not able to parse the rubric that we were using. It's a published, validated syllabus rubric. That the scoring is kind of weird, and the document is a dense PDF document that uses like color coding for different, so like things that, we're not super friendly with these LLMs, initially. And so we were really, my team and I were focused on how do we optimize the prompting so that it can parse this rubric, and then thinking about, well, do we even need it to calculate the scores of the rubric, at the end of the day, or could we just focus on giving qualitative feedback, blah, blah, blah. And just last week, I uploaded the rubric again and tried some of the prompts we had come up with 6 months ago, and ChatGPT did a much better job with our original prompts parsing this rubric. Like, it's still not perfect, but what's really cool now is the logic chains in these are just so sophisticated. And now I can also prompt it, if it doesn't do it already, you can prompt it to say, explain to me step by step how you parse this document. And then if it makes a mistake, I've found that even just because I did this with the syllabus, I said, you messed that up. Like you actually, those were not the categories of the rubric. It then fixes itself and says, oh, you're right. I'll take a much closer look. And then what it spit out was like, very good. So what that's telling me is that we really shouldn't be spending a ton of time. Like, we have to move fast is really the answer. Like, if you're trying to develop a tool, and this is going to inform how I'm now approaching this with my teammates, if we're trying to get something out to faculty, we should get it out as soon as possible. And maybe the solution in the near term, rather than trying to build these packaged tools, with nice APIs and IT tech support, or, IT support, maybe the trick is really more of these prompt libraries that some people have, already started putting out. But we're all going to have to be thinking about, using like version control to say, when this prompt was created, here are our notes, here was the model we tested it on. And maybe that's more a useful starting point, so that if 3 months lapse, we're all busy, we're all working on multiple projects. If a few months lapse and then you come back to this project, to not pick up where you were in terms of troubleshooting, but rather to reset and reevaluate, because my guess is like the things we're going to be optimizing now are not the things we were optimizing for 6 months ago. But if you have any insights from your own work, I'm happy to brainstorm this, because like I said, I am navigating this now, myself.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder sometimes whether, a big focus of the research agenda should be, what are the actual limitations and challenges, and what specific features and integration would be most useful for people, across the education spectrum, and even for continual, education in medicine or other fields, because the model seemed to get so good, like a fancy prompt. Now you could put in like 3 words and get the same response from ChatGPT or Open Evidence. And so the rate of improvement is so fast that I worry, like, a lot of research can't be done as fast.
Yeah. And I mean, I think another area of research that I'm personally interested in is really the attitudes. It relates to what you were saying about the barriers, but the attitudes of people for adopting it or not adopting it. Because one thing I didn't mention, but in that Teaching 100 class, we actually collaboratively designed our AI use policy as a class at the beginning of the semester. And so we had, our policy was, totally permissible. Like we said, there is value in us, no matter how you use AI. You could use AI to complete your assignments in the class, All we ask is that you disclose it, and that if you use AI, you accompany that work with a metacognitive reflection of why you used it, how it went, because we're all educators here and we're all interested in learning like the potential applications of this to your work as a student as well as our work as educators. So we left it completely open and we said there will be no punitive measures if you do this. Then at the end of the semester, I surveyed the class and asked, outside of these assignments where I incorporated GenAI, did you use GenAI in the class? And most people said no. And then I said, if you said no, why? Why not? And the two main reasons were, number one, I didn't really know how to use AI. And two was a concern of, I feel like I would be using it in a wrong way, which I found very interesting because we were explicit in our class, anything goes in this class. But I think in the broader context, a few of those examples I gave in the talk of, like, can we use it to outline letters of reference? Can we use it to write letters of reference? Can we use it to help us, in other activities professionally? I think that there's a lot of, we as professionals are getting a lot of mixed signals too of like, absolutely not, you cannot do this, you have to certify that you did not use AI, versus in other places we're kind of expected now almost to like, if you're not using AI to help you, with administrative tasks, like what are you doing? So I'm really interested in the attitudes and how that's going to factor into issues around equity as well, because I just saw an article published, Harvard Business Review published this past week or 2 weeks ago, that there are now observed gender gaps in adoption of GenAI. And one of the reasons why women seem to not be using it as much that they reported was women are more concerned about the ethical implications of using the technology. And so obviously, I think we should all be concerned about the ethical implications, but this was an interesting additional dimension to these questions of like, some people are going to be using it and it's conferring advantage. I see it in my own work. Like, I'm never going back to instructional design without using GenAI. Like, it's just silly not to. But some people are using it, some people aren't for different reasons, and that is going to yield larger gaps in, productivity and in innovation and, whatever metric. So I'm really interested in that aspect as an area for study that could be a little bit buffered from these changes of just how rapid the models are changing.
Yeah. Thanks.
And
Sorry,
sorry.
there's a lot of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Sonali, I see your hand is up. So
Yeah, that is fascinating. Yeah, thank you for the questions, Doctor. So yeah, I find it interesting that the attitudes about using students using it for assignments versus professors using it for recommendations are different. That I find fascinating, right? Because when it is you who has to put in the work and you are pressed for time, you kind of give yourself a pass a little bit more. But if I am a student and you are writing a recommendation letter for me, I don't know, like I might want you to write it, right? So it's like it's fascinating how the attitudes are different for different people from different angles. And also, I really like the point you brought up about the gender gaps there, and along with AI potentially reducing inequities, it can actually introduce them. So that is fascinating. Have you also explored using ChatGPT to write prompts? Like you can just prompt it like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you please write a good prompt for me and then answer it?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't put that in the presentation. I think I've played with that like once or twice in terms of the developing the reflex that I was talking about. I will say I don't have that reflex. Like, that's an excellent idea. I should be doing that more. And instead I have gotten good at like just sitting down and like, busting out prompts myself. But no, that's an excellent idea. And I've seen that done in workshops that I attended. And yeah, it's very cool. The more, just anecdotally, the more I have played with it, the more it's just fun to see like, oh, I could ask it to do that. Oh, it could do that. It could do that. So that's why I tried to give as many concrete examples as I could, because I feel like that is the hardest part is just knowing the unknown unknowns. Like, I can't even imagine what it could do for me. And so therefore I'm not going to experiment with it. So, but that's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again so much
you.
for joining today and for spending so much time with us, so even after the hour. So
Yeah,
thank
of
you.
course.
Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening, everybody.
All right. Yes, you too. Thank you again so much. All
Thanks.
right,
I
you.
look
bye.
forward to your materials and I'll
Oh,
go
yes.
ahead and share those.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. I'll send you the slides, and then the slide deck has the links to all the other materials in it. So,
Sounds great.
all
Thank you.
right. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna stop the recording and then we can stay for a minute if you
Oh,
like. Let's
yeah.
just